He was the most brilliant man in the company, and everyone knew it. Ideas poured out of him, original, dazzling, years ahead of the room, and almost none of them ever became anything real. Down the hall sat a plodder. No flash, no genius, slow on his feet. Yet somehow his projects shipped, his decisions held. Year after year, he delivered, while the brilliant man stalled. A young consultant named Peter Drucker kept seeing this same strange pattern in company after company, and it made no sense to him. Intelligence, imagination, knowledge. The brilliant man had more of all three. So why did the results keep flowing to the other one? Drucker chased that question for years. The answer became one of the most quietly influential books ever written about work, and it opens with a promise almost nobody believes: whatever the plodder had, you can learn it too. So Drucker did something simple. He studied the executives who actually got things done and looked for what they had in common. What he found was almost disappointing. They had nothing in common. Some were extroverts, some painfully shy. Some decided in a flash, some agonized for weeks. Some were warm, some cold as a fish. They differed in talent, in temperament, in everything you'd expect to matter. Except one thing. Every last one of them followed the same handful of practices. Not gifts, not personality. Practices. Things they did deliberately, over and over. Intelligence, imagination, and knowledge, Drucker wrote, are essential resources, but only effectiveness converts them into results. Effectiveness, he realized, was a separate skill of its own, and like any skill, like the multiplication table, it could be learned. That was the whole radical claim. Effectiveness can be learned. The only question left was how. But before the how, Drucker had to blow up who this was even for. Say executive, and you picture a corner office, a big title, people to boss around. Drucker threw that image out. An executive, he said, is anyone whose knowledge and position let them make decisions that materially affect results, whether they command thousands or work alone. He tells of a young captain in the jungles of Vietnam, no one senior for miles. The responsibility is always mine, the officer said, but the decision lies with whoever is on the spot. That soldier was an executive. So is the engineer, the analyst, the nurse, the teacher, anyone paid to think and to decide, which means the brilliant man's disease isn't rare, and the plodder's cure isn't reserved for the boardroom. If your judgment shapes what your work produces, this is about you. And here's the uncomfortable part. Almost everything about modern work is quietly conspiring to make you ineffective. Drucker laid out 4 traps, and every knowledge worker is caught in all 4. First, your time isn't yours. It belongs to everybody else. The calls, the meetings, the problems that walk through your door. Second, you're forced to keep operating, reacting, firefighting, unless you deliberately stop. Third, you sit inside an organization, which means your impact depends entirely on other people picking up what you produce and running with it. And fourth, the cruelest one. You live inside the walls, but results only happen outside, with the customer, the patient, the world, and the inside is always louder and more vivid than the out. Left alone, these 4 pressures pull every one of us toward busy, well-meaning uselessness. Talent won't save you. The brilliant man drowned in exactly these currents. Effectiveness isn't the absence of the traps. It's 5 habits practiced against them. And Drucker starts with the one that sounds far too humble to matter. Everyone assumes effectiveness begins with planning. Drucker says it begins somewhere stranger, with a stopwatch. Effective executives, he found, don't start with their tasks. They start with their time, because time is the one resource you can never rent, buy, or manufacture more of, and almost no one knows where theirs actually goes. Drucker sat with a company chairman who was certain he split his day 3 ways: top management, key customers, community work. Drucker had a secretary log it for a few weeks. When the record came back, the chairman fought it. It showed him spending his hours as a kind of dispatcher, chasing orders for customers he happened to know personally. He simply hadn't believed it of himself. Memory lies about time. So the first step is brutally concrete. Record it, not from memory, but as it happens. You cannot manage what you have never honestly seen. And what the record reveals is almost always a scandal of waste. Once you can finally see your time, Drucker says, you go to war for it. You hunt down the wasters, the meetings that shouldn't exist, the reports no one reads, the work you could hand to someone else. But pruning isn't the real goal. The goal is to gather what's left into large, unbroken blocks. Because real work, thinking, writing, deciding, cannot be done in 15-minute scraps. Small driblets, Drucker writes, are no time at all. One bank president told him he'd learned his attention span ran about 90 minutes. So every morning, he shut his door for 90 uninterrupted minutes. No calls, no visitors, not even his own staff. That single ritual made him effective. Harry Hopkins, dying and able to work only a few hours a day, was forced to cut everything but what truly mattered, and Churchill called him Lord Heart of the Matter. Guard your time like that, and you've built the platform. Now, what do you build on it? Here's where Drucker turns everyone's instincts inside out. Most people, asked what they do, describe their effort. I run the accounting department. I've got 800 people under me. Drucker heard those answers and heard failure. The effective executive asks a different question, one that faces outward. What can I contribute? Not what am I owed? Not what authority do I have? But what results should this organization expect from me? He tells of a new division head at a retail chain who asked himself the sharpest version of it. What can I, and no one else, do that would really make a difference? His answer surprised him, developing the managers of tomorrow. So 3 times a week, he walked the personnel department and made the hiring calls himself. It looked like a trivial thing. It built the deepest bench of talent in the whole industry. The shift from effort to contribution sounds like a matter of words. It quietly changes everything you touch. And it doesn't just change you. Drucker tells of a hospital where, for decades, whenever anyone proposed anything new, one old nurse would ask the same question. Are we really making the best contribution to the purpose of this hospital? Long after she retired, the staff still called it Nurse Brian's Rule, and the hospital stayed one of the finest in the country, held to standard by that single, stubborn question. That's the strange power of a focus on contribution. It raises the bar for everyone around you. Robert McNamara, arriving at the Pentagon knowing almost nothing of Congress, asked what he had to contribute to the men who controlled his budget, and taught himself to work with them. People who ask, "What can I give?" stop guarding their turf and start building teams almost by accident. Which brings Drucker to the practice most managers get exactly backwards, the one about strength and weakness. In the depths of the Civil War, the Union was losing, and Abraham Lincoln had a problem named Ulysses S. Grant. Grant was his most aggressive general, and everyone whispered, a heavy drinker. Lincoln's advisors wanted him gone. Lincoln's reply became legend. If I knew his brand, I'd send a barrel or so to some other generals. Because Grant could do the one thing that actually won battles, and Lincoln had already tried it the other way. He'd been appointing generals chosen for having no glaring weakness. They also won nothing. The moment Lincoln staffed for strength instead of against weakness, the war began to turn. This is Drucker's third practice, and it cuts against every instinct we have. Make strength productive. Don't build your team or your own career around plugging holes. One cannot build on weakness. The only question that matters about a person, Drucker says, is never what can't he do. It's what can he do uncommonly well? Because here is the trap. Try to hire the person with no weaknesses, and you'll get someone with no strengths either. Safe, rounded, and mediocre. Strong people, Drucker writes, always have strong weaknesses too. Where there are peaks, there are valleys. There is no such thing as a good man, he says. Good for what? General Robert E. Lee once had an officer who had disobeyed orders yet again. Furious, Lee was asked what should be done about the man. What an absurd question, Lee snapped. He performs. Andrew Carnegie, who built an empire on people far smarter than himself, wanted a single line carved on his gravestone. Here lies a man who knew how to bring into his servicemen better than he was himself. To lead by strength takes a peculiar kind of security, the confidence to surround yourself with people who outshine you. And almost nobody practiced that harder than the quiet general who built an army out of nothing. His name was George Marshall, and he built the American army that won the Second World War. Marshall had a rule. Any officer who proved less than outstanding in a job was moved, not punished, moved. Appointing him was my mistake, he would say, taking the blame onto himself. So it's my job to correct it. But the flip side was where the magic lived. Marshall spotted a middling major named Eisenhower and placed him where his strategic mind could grow. He rescued a reckless, insufferable officer named Patton over and over, because in battle, Patton was exactly the man you wanted. Marshall didn't find great generals. He grew them, one deliberate placement at a time. And this is Drucker's whole promise made flesh. Effectiveness can be learned and even taught. Marshall wasn't born knowing how to build men. He practiced it until an entire generation of leaders stood where he had planted them. Talent is only raw material. What you do with it is a discipline. By now, Drucker has handed you more to do than any human could manage, and that is exactly the point of practice 4. If there is one secret to effectiveness, he says, it is concentration. Effective executives do first things first, and they do one thing at a time. The temptation is always the opposite. Keep every ball in the air. Make a little progress everywhere at once. Drucker watched a pharmaceutical executive take a sleepy, one-country firm to worldwide leadership in 11 years by refusing to do more than one big thing at a time. First, only the direction of research. Then, only international expansion. Then, only a healthcare strategy. Each phase, a single priority, finished before the next began. Most people fail here not because the tasks are hard, but because they cannot bear to leave things undone. So they spread themselves across everything and finish nothing. To concentrate is to choose. And choosing means saying a word most of us are afraid of. That word is no. Drucker gives it a name, setting posteriorities, deciding what you will not do, and holding the line. Anyone can make a to-do list. The effective executive makes the other list too, the tasks that will deliberately never get done. And the first thing on it is usually yesterday. Every organization is clogged with the products, the projects, the habits of a past that's already dead. DuPont, Drucker notes, abandons a product while it's still profitable before it starts to sink, freeing its best people for what's next, while rivals nurse their dying favorites. Sloughing off yesterday, he calls it. But here's what Drucker insists on. None of this is really about analysis. Deciding what comes first and what comes not at all is not intelligent analysis, but courage. Pick the future over the past. Bet on the opportunity, not the problem. Aim high. That takes nerve, not a spreadsheet. And nowhere is more nerve required than in the fifth and hardest practice, the decision. Around 1910, a man named Theodore Vail ran the largest private company on earth, the Bell telephone system, and he made 4 decisions that looked, at the time, like heresy. He declared that Bell's real business was not profit, but service, and invented ways to measure his managers on it. He welcomed government regulation when every other tycoon fought it tooth and nail, because he saw that a public monopoly left alone would eventually be nationalized. He founded the Bell Labs to make his own technology obsolete before any competitor could. And he invented a whole new kind of stock, safe and steady, made to be owned by ordinary widows and small savers, locking in his capital for generations. Vail was solving problems that hadn't even happened yet. Years earlier, that very board had fired him for thinking too big. They begged him to come back. This is what a truly effective decision looks like. And Drucker spent 2 whole chapters dissecting how they're made. The first mistake almost everyone makes is treating every problem as brand new. Most problems, Drucker says, aren't unique at all. They're one more instance of a general situation, and they need a rule, a principle, not a fresh improvisation each time. So the effective decider slows down to ask, is this a symptom of something generic, or is it genuinely the exception? Get that wrong, and you get catastrophe. Before the First World War, the German army built its entire strategy on the brilliant Schlieffen Plan, which rested on one absolute condition: never split your forces. When the war came and events pressed in, the generals kept the plan, but quietly abandoned its one non-negotiable rule, and they had no fallback. The result was 4 years of stalemate and slaughter. A decision, Drucker teaches, is only as strong as the boundary conditions it has to satisfy, the specifications you refuse to violate. Define those clearly, and you're already halfway to the answer. But the answer itself starts from a surprising place, not facts, but disagreement. We love to believe good decisions start with the facts. Drucker says they start with opinions and with fighting about them. You cannot gather the right facts until you know what you're looking for, and that always begins as an untested hunch. So the effective executive demands not consensus, but dissent. The first rule in decision-making, Drucker writes, is that one does not make a decision unless there is disagreement. Alfred Sloan, who built General Motors into the largest company in the world, once opened a meeting on a proposal everyone loved. "I take it we are all in complete agreement," Sloan said. Heads nodded around the table. "Then I propose we postpone further discussion to give ourselves time to develop some disagreement and perhaps some understanding of what the decision is really about." Sloan trusted easy agreement least of all, because agreement usually means no one has truly thought it through. He taught a young Drucker a rule that stuck for life. "Don't bring me a compromise. Tell me first what's right, and I'll make the compromise myself." And sometimes, Drucker says, the right decision is to do nothing at all. A real option most people forget is even on the table. Every decision, he warns, is like surgery. It's an intervention in a living system, and it always carries the risk of shock. So you cut only when you truly must, and when you do, you cut cleanly. No half measures, because half a baby solves nothing. Then comes the part almost everyone skips. A decision isn't finished when it's announced. It's finished when it's actually done. So the effective executive builds feedback into it and goes to look in person. Truman once said of his successor, "Poor Ike, he'll give an order and nothing whatever is going to happen." A command is not a result. Reports lie the same way memory lies about time. The only way to know whether a decision became real is to get up from the desk and see for yourself. 5 practices, and now Drucker reveals what they were quietly building all along. Look back at the 5, Drucker says, and you'll notice they climb like a ladder. Recording your time is almost mechanical. A secretary can do it for you. Asking what you can contribute lifts you from mechanics into thinking about results. Building on strength becomes an attitude toward people. Respect put into action. Concentrating on first things demands not information but character, foresight, self-reliance, courage. And making real decisions is, at bottom, an ethics of action. The practices begin as procedures you follow and end as a person you become. That is why Drucker called effectiveness a form of self-development, the most genuine self-development there is. You don't reach it by gazing inward. Know thyself, he writes, is almost impossibly hard for mortal men. But everyone can obey a humbler command, know thy time, and start climbing from there. Do the small mechanical thing today, and over the years, it will quietly reshape who you are. And this, Drucker understood, is why it matters far beyond your own career. We live, he wrote, in a society of organizations, hospitals, schools, agencies, companies, and every one of them runs on ordinary knowledge workers making decisions. None of them can afford to sit and wait for geniuses to show up. The needs of large-scale organization, Drucker wrote, have to be satisfied by common people achieving uncommon performance. That is the quiet revolution hiding inside this modest little book. The effective executive isn't a superior breed of human. He's an ordinary person who has learned a handful of habits, and by learning them, does work that looks like brilliance from the outside. The brilliant man from our opening never learned them, and all his gifts evaporated. The plodder did, and his results compounded, quietly, for decades. The difference between them was never talent, it was practice. Which leaves exactly one question, the one Drucker has been driving at since the very first page. Are you willing to learn it? Not to be born with it, to learn it. Record where your time really goes. Ask what only you can contribute. Build on what people do well, yourself included. Do first things first, and second things not at all. Make your few decisions count, then get up and see that they actually happened. None of it requires genius. All of it requires the humility to practice something you assumed you already knew how to do. Drucker gave his own life a single, unglamorous summary near the end. I helped a few good people be effective in doing the right things. That is the whole promise, and it is yours to claim. The most powerful idea in management fits into 3 words the plodder understood, and the genius never did. Effectiveness can be learned. So here's the question the people who worked with Drucker learned to ask themselves, what are you going to do differently on Monday? If this hit home, watch our breakdown of Jim Collins's Good to Great next, where these very habits scale from one desk to an entire company.